Hello, hello. Today I thought instead of doing a making video, which I'm not really at the stage where I can show off any of the things I'm making, I thought I would do a Q&A because it's been ages since I did one, literally years, and I've done them as live sessions previously. I would love to do that again in the future. So if you have any questions that I don't answer in this one, keep hold of them, and in probably a few months' time, I will try and do another Q&A, and I will try and book out a time that I think people might be around and willing to hang out on YouTube for a bit, and we can do a nice little live session so I can take questions in advance and take some as we're chatting. So today I've taken some questions from my Patreon and Instagram and here on YouTube, and I've been far more organised than I usually am, and I actually have them printed on a piece of paper. So I'm going to go through them. I've tried to put them in something of a logical or sensible order, but some people asked more than one question, and I'd like to answer those people's questions all together. So it might mean that there's a bit of overlap with things, but let's get going. So first up, from Wild Weaver and Worm from Patreon. How did you first get into crafting, and what was your gateway craft? Do you have any plans for other ambitious projects, like the skirt you dyed, spun, wove and sewed? So in terms of how I first got into crafting, it's sort of something that's always been around. I come from a family that makes things. My mother always, she did some knitting, some crochet, a bit of embroidery. When she was younger, she did a lot of quilting and tatting. And there was always a big mending pile. And as soon as I was able to be roped in to help with the mending pile, that was encouraged. So I think I started with sewing probably because it was the most useful in terms of sewing, and I was taught some very basic embroidery stitches in crafts at school. And at the same time, I think when I was about 7, one of my grandmas taught me how to knit. And then again, when I was about 12, my other grandma taught me how to knit, because I didn't do any in the intervening time and I kind of forgot how. And then I once again had to teach myself to knit with the aid of the internet when I was in university, and got the itch again. And so I have done lots of crafts throughout the years. I always enjoyed sewing. I'd say that for many years sewing was my primary craft when I was in school. I did various bits of historical recreation stuff. I never really went for historical accuracy or anything, but I studied a lot of historical costume, and it's still something I'm very interested in. It just doesn't really come into my work these days, except when I occasionally take inspiration from like historical silhouettes for more modern stuff. So the Amber Apple cardigan is one that I very much was trying to capture, both a bit of 1940s but also a bit of 1890s drama. Yes, so was always quite inclined towards crafts, and doing things with my hands. I'm quite a fiddly person. I like to do things with my hands even while I'm talking. I can't really sit still in the evenings and not do something with my hands. So if I want to make myself not do craft projects, I then have to play on the PlayStation to again engage my brain but also have something to do with my hands. At school I used to literally just tear up little pieces of paper because that helps me focus. Yeah, so I think it was sewing that got me into things, and then knitting became much more portable. It's much easier to have to knit in a smaller space. Like, it wasn't really feasible for me to do much sewing at university, even though I did. It was very difficult to make space for my sewing machine in very tiny university bedrooms. So knitting then became more like both useful and affordable, and I could take projects with me places. And then, yeah, do you have any plans for other ambitious projects like my handspun skirt? Very much so. I've got probably two primary ones that I'm working on at the moment, which I have talked about in recent podcast episodes. There is my I've spun a lot of skewer blend yarn in kind of orangey green colours, and I'm currently spinning up some feather blend dyed in a pale green, and those will be woven together to then become some kind of garment, probably. But I will have to see how much yarn I have, to see how much fabric I then have, to then see how much of a thing I can make with it, because it's a new loom. It's wider than my old loom, and so I think it'll take me a while to kind of get a feel for what I can get out of the fabric I weave on it. So that's one of them. And then an even more ambitious one is one that has been going on forever, which I've been making a little bit of a video series about, and that's where I've naturally dyed some wool, and I'm also processing locally grown flax, and I'm going to blend those together and again spin, weave, sew, and again that will become something yet to be determined. Like with that kind of project, I don't usually know what I'm setting out to do before I've at least finished spinning the yarn. It's often when I actually have the fabric in my hands that I can then work out what I'm going to do with it. The skirt was a bit of an exception because I knew when I was spinning the yarn that it was going to be a skirt, because I knew that I was going to have roughly the right amount of yarn for it, and I had worked with that loom quite a few times before to make clothing and knew roughly how much I was going to have. So yeah. So yes, a couple of big projects in the works, which are just going to take a very long time because that's the way of those things. Those are kind of background projects, and I'm also spinning the yarn much, much finer than I was for the skirt. In both cases, I will be spinning the yarn very fine to try and get as fine a fabric as I can, which is much more achievable with the loom that I now have. So yeah, keep an eye out over the next months, years, and we'll see how those projects progress. Anna Geweka from here on YouTube says, how did you get started being so super involved in fibre arts? Kind of touched on that just in terms of crafts, but then where it started snowballing was probably late 2015, where I had some dye in the house because my husband and I had spent a summer's afternoon tie-dyeing some t-shirts and old clothes from around the house that we wanted to jazz up a bit. And tie-dyeing is super, super fun. And so I had fibre reactive dyes in the house, and then I can't remember how I found out, but probably via the internet somehow, discovered that you can use fibre reactive dyes on wool, even though they are primarily designed for cellulose fibres, so like cotton and linen. And I also had some undyed cream wool yarn, because at that stage I had quite a lot of yarn stash that was often unlabelled, that I think was at some point my grandma's or my mum's or various female relatives, that I'd just kind of inherited because no one was using it anymore. And so there was quite a lot of what turned out to be wool yarn. I had to do a bleach test on it. So if you don't know if yarn is a protein fibre, you can put it in diluted bleach, and if it's a protein fibre, it will disappear entirely over the course of a couple of hours. because bleach eats protein. Don't try to bleach wool goods. It's not going to go well. And so just as an experiment, I laid out the yarn in the bath and just started like splashing some dye on it. I didn't really know what I was doing in terms of like concentration of dye. I think at that point I put out cling film, put the yarn on top of it, had the yarn wet, and then steamed it in the microwave, which is a valid way of doing things, but does not have much capacity. So the second you start dyeing more yarn, that becomes not feasible. And I was immediately hooked then. Like, that was way too much fun. And I think within about 2 weeks, I also realised that you could spin yarn on a drop spindle. I always thought I didn't want to take up spinning because I assumed you had to have a wheel. And I did not have the space at that point for a spinning wheel, and also couldn't afford one. Then I found out that you could get a drop spindle, and at my local yarn shop I picked up a drop spindle and a little like selection of different breeds, hand dyed, and I just started playing around. And again, I was very, very bad when I started spinning. At least with the dyeing, I created yarn off the bat that I actually really liked. With the spinning, I was terrible to start with, and that's fairly standard. I was worse than average, I think. But once I started getting to the point with like my textiles that I could think not only about, I have this yarn, what can I turn it into, but I can also design the yarn from scratch. That was me gone. I like to get involved in processes, and I also get a bit bored of doing the same thing. And so being able to have one project comprise lots of different processes was super fun to me. So it all just snowballed from there, really. Then we took on weaving, because when you start spinning you end up with too much yarn to knit, because weaving is much faster than knitting. It's just the way it goes. Yeah. And then Slow.small from Instagram. How did you start out with your business? In brief, if you prefer. So again, I never really set out for this to be what it is now. And I don't necessarily want to always be doing exactly the same thing. Like, I like to have quite a lot of flexibility in what I'm doing, both in terms of what crafts I'm doing and in what areas of my business I'm focusing on, which is why I am not just a knitwear designer or a dyer or someone who makes videos. Like, I like to have lots of things going on so I can lean into the things that are grabbing my attention more. So when I started out, I had an Etsy shop. I started out making a lot of jewellery. I actually started selling the jewellery on eBay when I was a teenager. Literally like 15, 16 years old. I had a lot of jewellery making supplies. I didn't meet with huge success, but I was making far more jewellery than I could possibly wear myself. Lots of like beaded stuff. And then gradually, my parents had an interiors business, and they had a lot of leather samples from like upholstered chairs and sofas and things. They had samples of the different kinds of leather that you could have your chair or sofa in. They were about this big. And so I suddenly had all of these little bits of leather, and I started making jewellery out of those. And so that's when I started the Etsy shop. And then I also sold like handmade greetings cards on there. Still quite a lot of the beaded jewellery. And then gradually, as I was getting more into knitting, I started trying to sell hand knitted like baby booties and things, but it's selling finished items on Etsy or just online in general. It's very, very difficult to make back enough to make the time you put into it worthwhile. Unless you are working seriously in the luxury end of things, then you can charge what you're worth, and great. But selling finished objects was not for me. But then when I got into dyeing yarn, I started dyeing yarn to sell and really enjoyed that. Initially doing quite small batches, limited editions, buying my yarn from wholesalers. And I did that as a sideline. I think I started selling yarn in 2016. So for about a year and a half, maybe? Something like that. I did that alongside a full-time job. And then I got the opportunity to work part-time at Fernhill Farm, who is, that's the farm that I still source the wool from my Mendip yarn from. They needed someone to help them with the wool side of their business, and that was going to be quite flexible, so it meant that I could spend the time I wasn't doing that on my own business, and it also gave me the security of not just completely giving up the day job, like I still had some guaranteed income from that, and it was also working with a business that I learned so much from and have huge respect for. And then eventually my own stuff took off to the extent that I didn't really have time to work for Fernhill anymore, and so I stopped working there and just focused on all of my own stuff. And I think the only big difference in what I was doing at that stage and what I'm doing now was that I was doing a lot of tech editing then, which I haven't done for quite a long time. I was already winding down tech editing when I went on maternity leave, and when I went on maternity leave, I told my last remaining clients I wasn't going to be doing it anymore. So yeah, and now I do all the stuff I do. And now it's kind of some things I'm building up more. Like for the first time, I am carrying stuff made by other people. So I've got the buttons by Tom Dyson and something else he's just made for me, which is going to be coming very soon, but I will talk about those another day. And so yeah, like I'm always going to be working things out, and that's fun to me. But yeah, that's kind of how we got to where I am now. And then Tanya McAllister from Patreon says, in relation to your talk on creating a slow wardrobe you mentioned in an Insta post, how do you go about your choices of materials to create your wardrobe? I love to hear sources of inspiration and connection to place and materials. I'm getting excited to spend more time spinning and weaving this year, hopefully. Do you like to make things for the home as well as clothes? What is your favourite aspect of your craft? Design or spinning? Knitting? Many questions. Let's break it down a bit. How do I go about choices of materials? Sometimes this is less organised and strategic than it might be. A lot of my slow craft projects, like things where I have blended the fibre and spun the yarn and then knitted the thing or woven the thing and then sewed the thing, like a lot of it is based on things I have in stash. Like it's because I do all of this as a business, I have quite a lot of yarn. I have personal stash that's not related to business stuff. In some cases I have things left over from design projects for magazines and things. And then in terms of fibre, I have a lot of fibre stash. I have quite a number of fleeces and quite a bit of dyed fibre as well. That, like, it's often, I'm much better now at knowing exactly how much dye I need for a specific project. It used to be that when I was still getting used to quantities and things, I would end up with a lot of dye left in the water when I was dyeing yarn and things. And I don't like that. I don't want to pour it down the sink. It's a waste. And it is very mildly polluting. Probably less so than a lot of household cleaning products, but still. I didn't want the dye to go down the sink, and so I would just grab like handfuls of fleece or wool top or whatever I had in my personal stash that I didn't have a plan for, and I would just kind of shove it in. So I always like to have a bit of scoured fleece about so that I can just plonk it in the pots. And so often it was a case of, if I'm coming up with a blend, I will keep adding in bits of fibre from the stash, because it's often like I've got 30 grams of this and 60 grams of this, and I need to get up to like 350 grams or whatever to make a cardigan. I will keep putting things in that feel like they work until I have what I want. But it's a lot of the connection with the things I'm making is kind of based on the fact that I do have a very good memory. So pretty much all of my fibre, not all of it, but pretty much all of it, I know where it came from. I know when I bought it. I know the circumstances in which I got hold of it, and I hold on to all of those things, and then all of those things go into that project. And so often, like with fleeces I have, it's, I met a farmer at a show that I really liked and had a good chat with them, and they had a very nice fleece, and so I came home with a fleece. And, like I still have some alpaca fleece from when I went down to visit the weaving studio that my grandma used to learn to weave at, and they had some alpaca fleeces from a local farmer who had brought them in to see if anyone wanted them, and so I got some alpaca fleece from there. And yeah, so it's I hold on to those things, and I do rely a lot on my memory. I worry about what's going to happen when I get older, and that's not going to be something I can do as much. At some point I am going to have to get into the habit of writing little notes on things. And I think if I have little prompts, then it'll probably be fine. But I strongly recommend doing that if you are someone who struggles to keep track of things. Writing little notes about where they came from and what they mean to you is lovely. And so yeah, with those, the connection kind of comes with it. And then with some projects, I am deliberately seeking local fibres, like with my West Country collection, which I published back in December. I was deliberately looking for local farms that were producing their own undyed wool yarn, and that were part of the Fibre Shed network. And so that was kind of quite limiting. And so it was really nice to find and forge a really strong connection with those farms and learn about what they're doing on their land, and especially visiting their sheep and where they are farming. I strongly recommend places that have like sheep farms that have wool for sale. If they have a farm shop or anything on the farm, go and visit, because it's a great way of seeing the landscape that they are farming in. You can probably meet some of the sheep if they're not in faraway fields. Some of them will do like open days. At the moment, I know that some have things where you can meet the new lambs, and yeah, like finding ways you can visit sheep farms, especially if they are producers of wool, is a lovely way to make some of those connections. And then, do you like to make things for the home as well as clothes? Less so. I have done in the past. I used to make quite a lot of wall hangings, like tapestry ones, woven ones. I wasn't very good at it. It's something that if I developed more would be a really nice form of creative expression, I think. But that would involve me, business-wise, would involve me marketing myself more towards art than craft. Like, it's a very different, as I said with the knitting, it's a very different proposition to sell a material that someone else can turn into something to here's something that I've put dozens to hundreds of hours into, therefore it needs to be, for it to be worth my time, like I have to charge a lot of money, and you have to be in a place where you can build up that kind of client base. And I much prefer being like part of people's process. Like I love the idea that I am creating something, not just that they buy and it's finished and they decided they liked it and it goes on their wall or it goes on their body. Like the idea that I've taken the process so far and then they will be taking it the rest of the way is awesome. Like having any kind of input on someone else's creative process, it's so much fun. And so yes, I used to do some tapestry weaving. I have done some weaving of cloth for like cushion covers. I do have a long neglected project where I am shredding up yarn scraps to weave into yarn to then, to spin into yarn to then weave into a rug. That will happen eventually. I will get back to it. It's really tough on my wrists though, because I'm shredding the yarn with hand cards and that's hard work. But generally, I like making things that I wear. Like particularly things that I wear. Like I design things that I want in my wardrobe. And I just kind of love the way clothes are a challenge. Like bodies are really interesting. The shapes we are really interesting. And I've always been very, very interested in dress. And like I said, with historical costuming and stuff, I just find clothes fascinating as a way of self-expression. And I think homewares feel quite static. You put something on the wall or on a sofa. Like I'm not one of those people who does like seasonal decor. Like I will decorate for Christmas, that's it. I don't like having to change stuff around in the house frequently because I struggle enough trying to keep on top of all the mess. And so homewares feel quite static to me, whereas the idea of getting up every day and choosing what I'm going to wear is fun to me. It's a fun way of creative personal expression. And that's much, much more interesting to me. And there is also like, I can wear one thing and wear a different thing the next day. And again, that creates more scope for just more things. Whereas with homewares, like there's a limited amount of stuff you can just have out. So yeah, I think that's, I've never really considered the homewares thing and like why I am not particularly drawn to it. But as I get more into weaving, I do really want to try out the new loom for rugs because it's meant to be particularly good for them, and I'll see how that goes. I might have loads of fun with rugs because a bit of like really speedy, chunky weaving that you can be a bit rough with sounds super fun. So we'll see how that goes. What is your favourite aspect of your craft? Design or spinning or knitting? Depends on the day, week, month, year. As I said, I love lots of things. I sometimes fall slightly out of love with things and then come back to them later. I am like intellectually very excited about all the possibilities with weaving, but having just finished a weaving project that I enjoyed less than expected, I'm going to give it a little bit of time before I start my next weaving project because I don't want to jump into it while I've still got some lingering negative feelings. Same with knitwear design. At the moment, I am working on new designs, but they are designs that I had kind of started working on at some point before. And I'm not trying to push myself to do brand new things because I did an awful lot of knitwear design last year, and one might even say too much. It began to feel quite unbalanced, and it gave me less time to do all the other things I enjoy, and so I am now taking a little bit of time, not like I'm not knitwear designing right now, it's less of a focus for me while I'm enjoying other aspects of my craft. So it very much depends, like, what I'm excited about in the moment, and it's all potential, and it all kind of ties into each other. So yeah. Woolen Bluebird from Instagram. How did you find the confidence to start making patterns and videos? So in terms of how I started designing, when I was knitting in uni, like, it was always the case. Like, I discovered Ravelry fairly quickly on my like re-entry into the knitting world, in about 2010, maybe? Does that sound right? I think that's about right. And even though I got quite good at the Ravelry advanced search, I still couldn't find the things I wanted to knit. I didn't have the skills to just make the thing I wanted to knit out of my head, because those skills took years to build up. But I did start modifying things, not necessarily aptly, but I made modifications to things. I would swap out cable patterns and stitch patterns, and I would decide, I don't want this style of sleeve on this. And then as I was doing more experimenting, like, I would look at existing things and think, how did they create that? Like, how did they make that structural element? How did they do that construction? Often it was machine knitted, and so it will have been completely different anyway. But being very curious about how things were done and sort of trying to replicate things already had me in a kind of approaching knitwear creatively rather than just following a pattern. And then a friend of mine, Becca, just randomly sent me a call for submissions from Quince & Co, and I didn't realise that was how publications like get designs done. I think it's possibly a more recent thing. Like, I think there are many fewer in-house designers these days. And so it was a call for submissions for designs for a collection of scarves that Quince were publishing. And a scarf felt really low stakes because it's a rectangle. You can do a lot of creative stuff with a rectangle. Obviously, it doesn't have to be a rectangle. There were also shawls and things in that collection. But I used that as a sort of canvas for a stitch pattern thing I was working out with, like, combining ribbing and cables. And I sent off a submission and thought nothing further of it, because I thought, why on earth would they pick my design? I just assumed it was going to be rejected, and then it was actually accepted, which was a massive surprise and loads of fun. And I think that was a very, like, gentle way to start designing. I didn't go straight in with, I'm going to design a jumper, because had I done that, I would have had a really bad time. At that stage, most magazines were not providing sizing charts or even sizing guidelines. And, some publications will do grading for you, but that then reduces your fee. I've never done that before. I like to grade my own stuff. I'm scared of someone else doing it. And so I very much did things that felt within my ability. And like with designs, I will often try something I've not necessarily done before, but know that it is something I am capable of, and I won't have loads of different things in a single design that I'm not completely sure of myself in, because that's how you have a horrible time, your tech editor has a horrible time, your publisher has a horrible time. Like, yes. So I started with very little steps. And also Quince at that time were quite, you just had to submit a pattern not in a style guide. They didn't provide one. They just said, please write your pattern as simply as possible, and then our writers, our team, will write it up in our style guide. And that was really, really helpful. And then after that, doing a lot of tech editing meant that I was exposed to a lot of different ways of designing things. And so became very, very, very confident with the numbers. Like, I was already well set up to check over all of the numbers. I had multiple like sets of sizing charts from different places that I could take reference from. And so yeah, being very confident as a tech editor really helped me be confident as a designer. Not in terms of like, how do I make this aesthetic thing happen, but how do I ensure these instructions are good? How do I ensure that the grading is as good as I can make it, and that it's going to fit as many people as I can make it? So it's very much growing it gradually. But that first step of like randomly being accepted for calls for submissions was sort of a kick that I didn't really expect, and it kind of got me started. And in terms of how I got started making videos and how I gained the confidence to do that, I used to talk on Instagram stories a lot more than I do. I basically don't anymore. I'm spending quite a lot less time on Instagram anyway. And when I used to talk to the camera on Instagram quite frequently, because that's when everyone started doing that, I just got a lot of compliments on my voice. Like, lots of people just said that they liked how I talk. And I've always found that I'm quite wordy, and trying to communicate things in written form, for example, blog posts, can either get very bogged down and they don't feel very spontaneous, and I chop and change a lot in terms of what I'm saying. But I also think I can come across as quite dry in writing, and I find it difficult to convey my enthusiasm for things adequately. And so I just thought that talking about things in person would be a good way to convey that. Like, I am deeply passionate about my work and the stuff that I do, and being able to chat about that sort of more at length and see if people were interested in it was just something I wanted to try out. I think at that stage I had already done a bit of public speaking about my work. Not loads, but like enough that I was okay with talking to the concept of an audience, even if there wasn't an actual audience as I was recording. And you know, my first videos are janky as hell. They're you can tell how nervous I am, and they are probably a lot more stilted. I still say far too much. It annoys me as well. I need to stop it, but here we are. And yeah, that's kind of how I got started making videos. And once I'd started, I just never really stopped, because I always wanted to talk about more stuff. So yeah. Okay, I probably need to start like getting through questions slightly more quickly, because we're about a third of the way through and I feel like I've already been talking for a very long time. But we do have some shorter questions towards the end, and some things will overlap with things I've already said. So Hilly Explorer Billy on Instagram, hello Hills. Is there anything you'd like to design that would be a challenge that you haven't tackled yet? Absolutely, but not necessarily anything concrete. Like, I don't think I've got a sort of holy grail design that I one day hope to have the ability to do. It's more there are lots of things I would like to do that, as I was saying, like I am still building up my skills and have been for years. I like to do things that are interesting in some way. I think the challenges come in two directions. There is making myself finish a sample. There are lots of designs that I would like to work on that are things that I would like to exist, but I wouldn't necessarily get through knitting myself, and I definitely want to be working on stuff that I want to knit. But things like really complex cable stuff, I could have so much fun with cables, and I know that I would get bored of it while I was knitting it, and I would find it really frustrating. So like all over cabled garments, but not just like columns of cables, but weird like interlocky, crissy-crossy, like stuff that follows contour things. That kind of thing might not ever happen because I am not sure that I could convince myself that that was fun and that it would be worthwhile once I release the pattern. Because it's something I have to consider. Like, I am not a massive designer. It's not guaranteed that when I release something, like, I'm gonna get loads of sales and it's all gonna be wonderful. Like, it's a significant part of my business, but it is not the main part of my business, even though it is one of the things that takes up a load of time. So I have to balance those things carefully. And then on the other side of things, not just in terms of knitting the sample, grading is an obstacle. And I'm going to try and choose my words carefully because I don't... There are two different things in terms of, like... I absolutely believe that everyone should be able to knit things that fit their bodies. Like, size inclusivity is absolutely a good thing. However, it is definitely a damper on creativity. Sort of. I don't want this to be controversial. The idea that you should be able to make things fit as many bodies as possible is admirable. I absolutely believe in that. But it does restrict you quite severely in terms of designs sometimes, because things that will fit and suit certain body proportions won't necessarily fit and suit other body proportions. And so if I were to design a jumper, like, I use my own body as a starting point in terms of my designs. Luckily, I like quite a straight boxy fit. I don't use loads of waist shaping and things. And so those things generally are not too much of a challenge to grade. There are definitely things I have deliberately chosen not to do because I wouldn't be able to make them look good on bodies with very different proportions. Or just that when you start getting to larger bodies, and again, I'm not trying to denigrate larger bodies, I'm just saying that I approach a design from, like I've said, I like designing things for my own wardrobe. So designing for a larger body is not my default position, but I always want to make sure that the things I design will work for that. There are some things I would design for my own body that just wouldn't grade out nicely. You wouldn't be able to make the details work out well. It's a whole complex thing. Like, good grading is not just a case of adding more stitches. Like, that's not how bodies work. I am not claiming to be an authority on good fit. I try to make things fit as well as I can with the understanding that people have different proportions. Like, we use bust circumference as a standard. I do think you should be able to modify things to your own body. And I do the same with mine. Like, I have comparatively very long arms and a short body and ridiculously long legs. And despite being quite skinny, I'm somewhat curvy. Like, I am aware of the kind of body I have and I make changes for that. I don't design specifically for that though. I try to design to standard charts, which is why sometimes we get, well, no, I do like shorter sleeves for like working with my hands and stuff, but this is like a normal sleeve length. And so yes, there are things that I would like to design as a garment for myself, but commercially wouldn't do so. And it's not just a case of making it for lots of sizes. There are some things where it's like, that's just not going to be, like, it's not going to be possible to write up instructions for someone else to follow for that to be worthwhile. Like, a very interesting example is, what's the book called? Alice Starmore's one, where she's got all the, like, mythological creatures and things. And she has patterns in those books, or is the pattern book a separate one? But very notably, the patterns are not for the amazing, insanely complex creations she has come up with. She specifically stated that she wanted to use knitting as an art form and a form of expression, whilst not having to worry about writing up instructions for other people to follow, and trying to make them be scalable in various directions. So yeah, like that. There are significant challenges in knitwear design that if I were just doing it from a personal point of view, if I were just designing things I wanted for me without any considerations of having to publish them, there are things that I would do that I probably won't, just because that is the way that works. I hope I phrased that okay and that you get where I'm coming from with it. April Davis on YouTube. Do you think of what type of item you want to design, then come up with the stitch pattern, or do you get a stitch pattern idea and then decide whether it should become a shawl, jumper or hat, etc.? Bit of both. Sometimes I come up with an interesting stitch pattern, or there's like herringbone stitch. I always want to find more reasons to use herringbone stitch. It's quite an annoying stitch, because it has behaviours and ways of working that are interesting. So sometimes I design things being like, how can I get some herringbone stitch on here? But often I come up with the type of thing it is first, and then see. Sometimes it's in parallel. Sometimes it's like, I want to design a cable pattern that's inspired by this thing, and I think it would work well on a cardigan, for example. That's happened a couple of times. Willana and Valley Roofs, both cases where that happened. I'd say usually though, I come up with the kind of thing I want to make, and then go about working on the stitch pattern or design, like details and whatever it is. And especially because I usually like to integrate stitch patterns quite well into what I'm doing. Obviously with a yoke, you have to set out to design a yoke because of the shape it is and the way the increases form part of it. Like, you have to do that. But every so often I'll come up with a stitch pattern and think, I want to put this on something, what would it work on? Joanna Martin from Patreon. Hello, Joe. Hi, Marina. As a designer, do you ever find your inspiration pool has dried up a bit? If or when this happens, what, apart from simply waiting for a shower, do you do to refresh? Or have you simply never run out of ideas? P.S. I love your yarn, fibre and designs. Your podcasts are a constant source of encouragement and inspiration to me. That's a delightful thing to hear. Thank you, Joe. Yes, so I don't have to go casting about for inspiration. It comes to me perpetually, and I have to shield myself against it. Every so often, though, it is less present. And rather than trying to push it, I usually just kind of work on other things. I usually have a little mental back catalogue of ideas I've had that I would like to work on, and sometimes things sit there for years and eventually are retrieved. Sometimes I am tripping over myself and have far too many things that I want to be working on at the same time. That is difficult to manage. It's not sensible. I then have to be quite careful about how I go through and cull things, what things I decide to focus on. But in terms of finding inspiration, if it is lacking if, for example, there is a call for submissions with a mood board I particularly like and a publication that I would really like to be part of. Pinterest, love Pinterest. I would make Pinterest boards all day. I really love making a mood board. I have, even if it's not for a specific thing, I have an ongoing back catalogue of many, many boards. Sometimes I go through and remove things that no longer feel inspiring to me, or like some things from about 15 years ago that actually feel really dated now. Even though they didn't at the time, but then you look at it and I was like, wow, that's very 2010, look at that. I try not to follow trends, but yeah. But also I don't like doing things where it's like, I don't know, tied to a specific trend that is currently very not on trend. Yeah, I don't know. No, not that I design things that are remotely fashionable. I like quite a bit of personal expression in the way I dress and therefore the way I design. My personal style board has King Theoden on it, so there isn't always logic. So yeah, Pinterest, going through boards that date back years and seeing and again, because I have a good memory, I know exactly why I pin things. I know what details draw me to things. Some things, if I can't remember why I pinned it, that has to go. But yes, obsessed with Pinterest. Spinning, Yorkshire Gnome Knits. When, why, and how did you start spinning? Sort of covered that in the whole how did I start crafts thing. When? End of 2015. Why? Because why not? How? I got a drop spindle and a little set of fibre samples. And that, the thing with the drop spindle and the set of fibre samples, that is why I now have a box of 4 of my blends with either 100 gram or 25 gram samples of them that you can try out, because I think trying out different breeds and different textures can really, really help. But yes, I wanted to make yarn. It seemed like it was a case of, once I realised that drop spindles existed, why have I not done this already? I think Instagram was probably to blame there, just seeing very pretty things that people were spinning. And again, just that idea of not necessarily control, because it's not like I'm very technical with a lot of my crafts. Knitting, yes, because I have to be. But with other things, like the spinning in particular, I operate off vibes. And so it's not like I want to be able to make exactly this kind of yarn. It's just the idea of creating my own yarn and then being able to turn that into something else. That's just super cool. So yeah, and also like that whole thing of being able to tie stories into your making. Yeah, that's something that drives me, like being able to make lots of little choices based on interactions you have and things that inspire you and things you've seen. I love all of that, and the more of that I can bring into it, like the more crafting time I spend on a project, the more like memories of the music I was listening to, or where I was knitting something, or what was going on in my life at the time. I love those things. Martushka makes Martushka on Instagram. Hello, Marta. What do you love about spinning yarn? Oops, answered that already. And what made you decide to start dyeing your own fibre? So yes, I started dyeing yarn. I was dyeing yarn for a very long... I actually can't remember how long I was dyeing yarn for before I started dyeing fibre. Lies, it wasn't long at all. It was almost immediate. Retract. So I started both dyeing and spinning at the end of 2015. 2015 going into 2016, my husband and I went on a trip to Argentina, because that's where my parents live. We spent Christmas and New Year over there, and I remember buying some fibre in a like yarn craft shop in their town, and I definitely dyed quite a lot of I bought some white and some grey fibre. I dyed some of the white because I hadn't yet started dyeing on coloured fibre, but again, that didn't take long either. And so then I've been dyeing since then, but in terms of more recently, so I focused on yarn for a long time. Fibre has kind of been and gone a bit, depending. Many people more are spinning now. And so the fibre recently has been going quite nicely for me. I started dyeing this time round, dyeing the fibre that I am currently dyeing, when Wing & Wool approached me and asked if I wanted to create my own blend in collaboration with them. And so I created the skewer blend. They stock that, I also stock that. As part of that, they blended up 1 kilo of the blend for me, and that was just for my own personal use. And so, 1 kilo of fluff is quite a lot of fluff. And so I thought I would try dyeing a couple of 100 grams of it. And then that is what became my skirt, which if you haven't seen, I made a video about a couple of videos ago, so you can go and see that. And then that dyed up really nicely. And as I shared it, like, people seemed to be excited about it. And so I decided to do a little, like, I bought in some more fibre from Wingham. Like, I asked if they'd be willing to sell some to me because they were just selling skewer blend as it was. And so I did a little shop update and it sold out very quickly. And that's been happening ever since. They don't sell out immediately now because I am dyeing so much more. But again, things snowball. Okay, Alicia on Patreon. What is your most enjoyable fibre prep to spin? And do you have a favourite out of your 4 blends in the shop? Make me choose my own babies. No, I have one actual baby. That one's my favourite. No, of the fibre, it's really hard because they're all created for very different things. Like, of the 4 blends, I keep staring over there and there, sorry, because I am looking at the fibre that I have in this room right now, and this isn't even my craft room. All of the fibre is upstairs, but there is some there because I've got my spinning over there, and fibre that I have just finished picking and braiding up over there, because I'm in full fibre dyeing mode, because I have a yarn show next week and I'm very excited and I want to have loads and loads of nice fibre for people. All of the blends I have created for different reasons and to be quite different from each other. I think in terms of funness to spin, probably skewer blend, because that is what I designed it for. Like I sampled loads and loads of different things, different breeds, and then I blended together the ones I had most fun with. That was basically how I made that. I wanted it to be really enjoyable for me to spin, and then I hoped that other people would also enjoy that. And that seems to be the case. Like, there are some people who really, really enjoy skewer blend. I know of blankets that exist in skewer blend, which is just amazing. So yes, skewer blend, super, super fun to spin. At the moment I am spinning feather blend. Feather blend is meant to be very sleek and lustrous, and it really is. Like, I don't know if it's this particular batch or if I just keep forgetting how nice it is when I dye other stuff. Not that they're less nice, but they're different. Like, it is so sleek and silky and you can spin it really fine. So I'm having lots of fun with feather blend and I think it's really pretty and quite glossy, which is nice. It's quite shiny and silky. Solace is kind of the opposite. Solace is really, really bouncy and cloudy and all of the colours look very matte on it. All of the colours dyed on Solace, even if they're very, very bright, just have this kind of chilled out, like calm feeling to them, which I really love. And I have spun a lot of Solace and it was really nice. I did spin the undyed though, which got quite boring because make me spin more than 200 grams of the same of anything and I will get really bored of it. And then tilth, I would love to spin a decent quantity of tilth. It's the only one now because it's the most recent one that I haven't done more than like a little sample of. But it's so floofy and bouncy and soft. Like, when you work with wool, as in fleece off sheep, it's often the case that the genes that dictate colour also dictate like fineness. So with Shetland specifically, darker fibre is often a bit coarser than lighter fibre. That's often the way that goes. It's not always the case, but so in my mind, I expect darker wool to feel slightly harsher than default lighter wool. It's not that I expect white wool to be soft, but darker wool definitely. Also because I've been working with a lot of Svartblås, which is, yeah, it's got some texture going on. But then tilth surprises me every time because it's so floofy and gentle and soft and lovely. So yes, I've not answered your question at all. I love all of them. My favourite to spin is probably skewer, but I don't think it's necessarily my favourite of the fibres, like to actually be yarn, if that makes sense. But it is super fun. And I've just realised the question says favourite prep and not just my favourite blend. So in terms of general prep, it's an interesting one because, like, I like spinning from top because it's like commercially prepared top. It's much easier to spin more smoothly and evenly. But the kind of yarn I really like making is where I blend together lots and lots of different fibres. I do that on my drum carder, even in situations where combs might be more appropriate because I have a drum carder and I don't have combs. And then I take those bats and draft them out into a kind of faux top because I try to get the fibres aligned, and then drafting that out and splitting it into little nests. I really enjoy that prep. Because in that situation I will often blend together quite different fibres, and they're often like blended from fleece that I've scoured and processed myself and stuff. It's usually less of a consistent preparation that then leads to less of a consistent yarn, but I really enjoy that. It somehow is more engaging, and it creates a yarn that feels like it has loads of soul to it, because it's got loads of character, and like I can see where the little bits of Angora didn't blend in properly, because Angora is so much finer than everything else and it tends to clump like mad. I love those little Angora clumps, they're great. I've done a lot of things with Angora in them because I was given some Angora fluff many years ago, and I tend to use it in quite small amounts in blends because it's a bit mad to work with. And so lots of my projects have a bit of Angora in. And yeah, I think letting some of the characteristics of the individual fibres show through a bit more in some places than others is super fun. Then, Mocha Pemberley 4525 on YouTube. I believe this is Monica, not 100% sure, but hi Monica if it is you. Do you have any new projects or plans for your fibre shed work? So there's my fibre shed collection, the West Country collection, which I published end of last year from this land. So that is available as a PDF as of now. And it is 5 patterns, and it tells a very abbreviated version of the stories of my visits to those farms and how the designs are inspired by those visits. Those patterns will become available individually. I'm going to wait until the autumn to do that because no one wants to be, well, obviously seasons are different everywhere, but primarily I'm doing marketing in the Northern Hemisphere, and I don't want to be promoting DK weight cabled cardigans in May. It's not sensible. So I will be releasing those as individual patterns in probably September, towards the autumn, and I'm hoping to find time to do some investigating into prospects of having it printed as a book, for like more than one book in terms of number of copies, so that people are able to purchase a physical copy of it. The numbers are likely to be scary, and so I'm hesitant to start. But I might look at like print on demand options, or to see how much it would be to get a print run done of like a sensible number of copies that I might ever be able to shift in my lifetime. I haven't done much work on, despite having a background in print production in publishing. That was on the scale of tens of thousands of books that are being printed in China and shipped across continents. That's not what we're looking at. And so it's a very, very different prospect, trying to work that all out for myself. I would love it to be available, but also I just need to look at how feasible it is. So yeah. So that's in terms of that collection. Then more broad fibre shed stuff. The project I mentioned right at the beginning, where I've naturally dyed some fleece and I'm working with some flax, and I'm going to blend those up and turn them into cloth and then turn that into a garment. That would technically be a fibre shed project because all of the fibres and dyes involved there within are sourced very locally. Sourced within the West Country, and so yes, that project would be a fibre shed thing. But in terms of like official projects in collaboration with fibre shed, I don't have anything in the works at the moment, but that's not to say I won't, just not what I'm doing right now. But you know, I like as much of my work to, well, it's mostly personal projects, to be honest, because in terms of, oh no, another one that would technically count, Svartbliss. I said I'm working with Svartbliss. I think I've mentioned this previously. I have a lot of Svartbliss fleece from a farm a couple of villages over, which I'm going to send to a mill down in Dorset. And when that gets back, that will have all been produced within like a bit over an hour's drive, which I think is quite cool. But I can give no dates on that. That will be available for sale because there will be a decent amount of it, but can't give dates on it because I haven't finished skirting the fleece and I need to do that before I can send it to the mill, and it's only when the mill actually has the fleece that they can tell me how long it might take. So we'll see. Next up we have Sheena Milne. We have a couple of longish ones now. Sheena has quite a lot of questions. What are your favourite knitting needles? Knit Pro Mindful. This is kind of, those are the ones of the needles I have that I prefer using. So my knitting needle, I started out with, oh god, Knit Picks. I can't remember which ones they were. They're the ones that are just beechwood, like nice coloured wood, not the like multicoloured Knit Pro ones. Knit Picks and Knit Pro, not the same. They are compatible. They are not the same. Knit Picks are generally, across the board, made to a higher standard. Knit Pro, I'm generally not so keen on. For a while I used the Symphony ones, which are the multicoloured wood, kept snapping them. I got an interchangeable set from Knit Picks that started at 3.5mm, I believe. Now everything below 4mm, and actually no, all needles I buy, I get the Knit Pro Mindful ones because they are compatible. They are super sharp, which I really like for like cables and increases and all that goodness. And they seem to be of higher quality than most of the Knit Pro stuff. The cables, they have like swivelly cables on them, which I enjoy. They do still kink, but that's kind of a problem with most of that kind of cable. I use pretty much exclusively interchangeable circular needles. I can't use shorties because I have long hands and they make my wrists do bad things. And for needles smaller than 3mm, where you can't do interchangeables with the standard Knit Pro Knit Picks system, I use ChowGoo. I've just snapped a pair of 2.5mm bamboo ones, which I had from years and years and years ago. I will replace those with ChowGoo red lace. They're nice and sharp. I love the cables on them. If I weren't already invested in another system for interchangeables, I might switch over. Like I might pick ChowGoo as the way to go, but I've not used their interchangeables. I just really like their cables and their pointy needles. But they're expensive, and Mindful ones are cheaper and they fit with all the stuff I already have. So those are kind of the two I use. ChowGoo red lace. Don't like zings for the Knit Pros. They're too blunt. They're fine, but they're really blunt. They're not. I cable without a cable needle, and that requires a certain sharpness of needles. And so I'm also moving across to metal needles because I snap wooden ones. I'm a brute. Not necessarily while I'm knitting, I just like leave them on the sofa and then stand on the sofa because I can't behave like a proper adult. So yeah. Do you have a favourite type of wool? That might be too broad. I don't know how to start answering that. Are we talking a type, like a breed of sheep? Because if so, I'd say I have probably worked the most with Shetland. I love Shetland. I love everything it has going on. I love all the natural colours it comes in. I like that it's actually quite variable. You can get super fine Shetland. You can, well, not super fine in terms of like super fine merino, but like quite nice fine Shetland. And then you can get really quite coarse Shetland because they can be very variable even on the same sheep. I've worked loads with Shetland yarn and with Shetland fleece and with Shetland cross fleeces. I'd say, yeah, most of the yarn I work with has some Shetland in it. And that's kind of why I didn't put Shetland in my first couple of blends, because it felt too predictable, of spinning fibre. Yeah, it just felt too predictable and I wanted to do something a bit different. But I really like Shetland. I don't know if that's the question you're asking, but yeah. And a little more technical, do you have any suggestions for even tension in the round? I knit continental and try so hard to release the yarn evenly and work near the tips, but I still get a few rode out bits in any jumper, even though it's all knit stitches, not knits v purls. Blocking helps a lot and it's not obvious in the finished item. It just bothers me that it's not as tidy as I think it should be. Interesting. No idea, because I can have a tendency with certain yarns when knitting flat to row out. I knit continental and my purls are definitely a bit looser. These days I am much better at tensioning. I came to continental knitting relatively late in my knitting career, as far as it is so far. I had been knitting English for a long time before I switched. And so with pearls, like the general suggestion is to try a Norwegian pearl, which I've never really bothered with. I've usually just done workarounds, but now my tensioning has just got much better and it seems to be solving itself. I would say the only thing I can suggest is looking at different tensioning methods. It sounds like if you're getting uneven, like with my rowing out, it was very definitely that you could tell where lines of knits were and you could tell where lines of purls were. The purl rows would be looser. If it's just uneven tension all over the place, I would suggest looking at how you tension the yarn around your fingers, and trying different methods. And that's a difficult one to suggest because I think with tensioning methods it takes quite a while to get used to anyway, but it sounds like you might not have enough tension on the yarn to feed evenly. So like, I don't tend to tension my yarn a lot. I don't have it like wrapped around multiple fingers and stuff, but it might be that adding another finger into the mix or something might help. Unsure. Sorry, I can't be more helpful than that, but it's not a problem I've encountered. If anyone else has, please give suggestions for Sheena. Yeah. And then Nikki Hughes, again on Patreon. I've been getting into different blends recently. I'd never thought of dyeing over darker wool, but you have opened my eyes. Glad to provide some inspiration. I wanted to experiment with a blend to represent my local breeds and make a 3 counties blend with breeds from Herefordshire, Ryland, Gloucestershire, obvs Cotswold, but I can't find a breed native to Worcestershire. Have you ever come across one or have any idea where I could find out? I'm going to go for Shropshire and or Radnor if I can't find a Worcestershire breed. Best wishes, Nikki. I'm very sorry, Nikki. I have done some research on this too, because when I was creating my Solace blend, which is sort of a West of England blend, and it is a 3 counties blend, but not necessarily the ones right where I am. That is Dorset, Cotswold and Shropshire. And that kind of is the case, like Radnor would probably be nearer than Shropshire to me, and same with Wiltshire, but I was at Wingham Woolwork and they don't carry Radnor or Wiltshire, so that's the way we went. As far as I know, I shouldn't have picked this question for last. Why have I done this? As far as I know, there isn't a Worcestershire breed. I've not come across one. yeah, and I'm not sure exactly where you're based, because I think Radna is, I can't remember if it spans the border or is just on the Welsh side. But yeah, I've been enjoying Shropshire. It's the darker of the wools in my Solace blend, and I've been liking that, so that sounds like a good shout. And in fact, you've got Cotswold, which I've got in the Solace blend, which is obviously very long and glossy and nice. And then Ryland, I think is quite, I can't remember if it has quite a short staple length, but it's definitely very, very crimpy and bouncy. And I think that could possibly be quite similar to the Dorset Horn that I've got in my Solace. And so, yeah, if you went for Shropshire, it could end up being quite similar to Solace, which is a very nice blend. And Radna I have not worked with, but would like to. And yeah. So, I don't really want to end this on, sorry, I can't really help. But again, if anyone knows of a Worcester breed, add it in the comments below and Nikki might see it, because it would be really helpful. And if I spot it, then I'll pass it on. But also I'm not great at keeping up with my comments, sorry guys. Yeah, this has been mega fun. I feel like I've been talking for a very long time, quite a lot of length about a lot of things. So I hope this has been enjoyable. If you like this, I'd love to hear. If anything resonated with you in particular, that would be lovely to hear about too. And yeah, I will hopefully do another Q&A, not immediately because I've probably just answered a lot of questions that people have, but then at some point, like maybe towards the autumn, I'll do another one and try to do it live so that we can get a bit of chat going on, because that's always nice. And I will catch you then. So bye bye for now.